Welcome to Moving People Forward with Mark Elfstrand. This program is a series of conversations on commonly seen challenges in everyday people's lives. We hope you'll be inspired by the stories you hear today. Perhaps you know of someone who would also benefit. Be sure to share the program link with a friend. Now, here's Mark.
What happens when you put a millennial in the workplace with somebody who, well, let's just say, is more seasoned in the area of business? Ooh, there can be conflict. In fact, not only conflict, but sometimes, well, maybe let's just say the relationships don't work at all. What is the problem with this generational difference? We're going to talk about that for a few minutes with my special guest, John Blumberg. John is a corporate trainer. He specializes on core values and specifically on the area of integrity. And John, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Mark.
Yeah, now you and I, you're not a millennial. I've looked at you and I'm pretty sure you're not a millennial,
I can't pass for one, huh?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But you do a lot of corporate coaching, a lot of corporate training, and I would imagine this conversation has to come up with executives. You know, I'm really struggling. John, it seems like we have two different set of values going on here. Tell me about this.
Yeah, I think, I think first of all, I think we have to look at the reality that we grow up in a certain kind of world. We grow up in certain different sets of experiences. And I would say that the world that the Boomers grew up in was a different world than the Millennials grew up in. And so they've just had different experiences. And there are a lot of speakers out there that really focus on this idea of generational differences. And in my book, Return on Integrity, I tried to come at this issue and say, I don't think there's as much difference as we think there is. And the reason that there appears to be a difference is because we're looking on the surface. And if you look on the surface of anything, you'll see a lot more difference than you will if you dig a lot deeper. And so I would suggest in my work and values that if we really began to dig into the values within the individuals, we would see a lot of commonality. Now, Mark, in my work on values, I try to differentiate between what do I value versus what are my values? And I would say that when you answer, and a lot of people want to change the question of what are my values to what do I value. It's a much easier answer because it gets into our wants and our needs and our behaviors and our opinions and our beliefs. What are my values is a very different thing. In fact, I would suggest when you're at the values level that core values do not divide. They always bring together. And so if we take a word like respect, respect never divides. It always brings people together. So if we're at the level within millennials or we're at the level within boomers and we're truly at that core value level, I bet you that we would see a commonality that would bring generations together. And it's not just those two generations. There's a lot in between in the workplace today. But I think we would see a commonality that would be surprising and would be very inclusive.
How do you see a CEO working in that dynamic, trying to create unity, though, in terms of objectives and so on, if maybe they're not on the same page? The millennials just maybe, I don't know that I'm there, but they still want a job. How do you process that?
Yeah, so I think rightfully a lot of millennials, they've been exposed to so much more than we were at a very early stage of life. And so they've really, I think, developed a worldview that is much richer and deeper than we would have ever had the chance to be aware of. And so I think they drive a lot more with a sense of purpose, whereas I think a lot of times, we grew up in a world where everything was booming, it was growing, it was post-World War II, organizations were being built. It was all this motion of growth. And because of that, we just did whatever we were told to do, right? And everybody was doing it, and there was a momentum and an excitement to that building. Today, I think they want to know, and Simon Sinek has done such a good job on that, start with why. Why are we doing this? And so I would say that, and maybe Stephen Covey had it right when that whole principle that is very biblical based is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And if everybody did that, I think we all would learn from the different perspectives of the worlds that we grew up in.
I think back to when I was, wanting to get into business and looking forward to the opportunity of hanging out with other business guys. But, never along the way did I think, wow, I can't wait to become a corporate raider. but that
Yes.
is symptomatic to some degree of our generation.
Yeah.
And you go, what is that all about? That just abuses people, and is willing to come into a company and change the whole culture and everything else just for the sake of making money. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's dangerous. If we are creating, in fact, I often talk that capitalism is an amazing system. But capitalism without a soul is very dangerous. And I would say the same is true for corporate America, that if you have a corporation where it is not grounded deeply on a set of core values, and I think we're seeing this in the marketplace today. I mean, it was just in this last year, how many CEOs, hundreds of CEOs, signed a document saying it's about more than profit.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem, and that's not to say that those at the top of organizations, in fact, if you really want to get to the core of this problem.
Yeah, you like to use that word, don't
I
you?
know. It is, it's all of us, right? Because the system has changed in the sense of how the capital markets work, and frankly, for really good reasons. Money markets, we've distanced the investor from where it's being invested. Money markets were evolved and got so many more people with their 401ks in the capital markets game. But the problem is all the people that are making those investments, which, by the way, they have no idea where it's being invested, all they want is a return.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, and I'm, in my book, Return on Integrity, I tried to dive into that quite a bit because it's a systemic issue. So a lot of times we look at the executives and say they're all just about money. Well, they have enormous pressure on them to deliver in the short term, and it's the shareholders or the money market fund holders that are expecting that, right? So you have to look at the whole picture, and it's not just one or two bad people, in the story. We're all systemically connected into this.
Well, you and I worked on a project in Chicago together for a while that met with executives, and we did a breakout on what we call the soul of the firm, which is actually following the title of a book by Bill Pollard, who was on our committee, and then the soul of the executive, and then finding support for the soul of the executive, so you're not alone out there and isolated and so on like that in the business world. But it comes back to that question: how many CEO discussions come to, would you tell us about your moral compass? What guides you? When you were working for Arthur Andersen, and you were consulting, did those kind of questions come up in interviewing CEOs?
Well, a lot of times changed since then, and I do believe, at Arthur Andersen, we actually had 7 core values, and they were ingrained in you. We talked about them a lot. The one that there were 2 things I remember. One actually wasn't a core value; it was a way of the culture, and that was think straight and talk straight. And what that meant was be clear in your thinking and to be honest in your conversation. If there was ever a meeting after a meeting, that was a kiss of death in your career. No, we have the meeting in the meeting. So that was one. But in the core values, the one that people really talked most about was stewardship. And that means leaving it better than what you would have found it. But I don't think a lot of organizations were having those conversations. And one thing I find, Mark, is if you get an executive by themselves, one-on-one, behind closed doors, they're deeply human. They're deeply concerned. And oftentimes there is a disconnect, a disintegration with the pressures that they face day to day. I can't tell you how many CEOs, when you ask them what they worry about, what they'll tell you is the families of the employees. They worry about the pressure that's on them to make this thing work, because a lot of people are dependent on that organization working in the families that they have. And I don't think that gets enough conversation, but that's what they'll talk about when they're oftentimes behind closed doors.
Well, it comes back to my thing, though, about corporate raiders. I mean, if you were asking what's your core value, greed and power. Wow, really? That'll take you somewhere, I guess.
And what I would argue with that, Mark, is they would claim that as a core value. What I would suggest is it's a deeply core need within them that has drifted terribly. But and that's the challenge with our needs, is they're so deeply ingrained that we get them confused with our core values. And what I would suggest is that greed it divides, right? It's a divisive thing, and therefore it, by definition, can't be a core value.
Well, we've been having a conversation with John Blumberg, who's a corporate trainer, and along with that, he has written 4 books. 2 of them deal with the subject of integrity. In fact, this is kind of a warm-up program. We want you to watch our next episode of Moving People Forward, as John Blumberg will get into more detail about what it means to live not only with core values generally, but specifically in the area of integrity. So I hope you'll join us for that next episode. But thank you, John, for being with us. If people would like to find out more about what you do and about your books, how do they link up with you?
Yeah, probably the best way is they can go to my website, which is blumbergroi.com, so BLUMBERG, and then ROI, like return on integrity. So blumbergroi.com, or they can just put my last name in on Amazon, and it should call up the books there as well.
Okay, so you'll be looking for our next episode as we get into more detail on this very important subject. Well, that's our program for today. As the sages have told us, grow in wisdom, think humbly of yourself, and love one another. May it be so with you. Join me next time for more of Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand.